Hi, welcome back to the Benchmarkers Rugby Show. My name is Kumbi. I am one of your co-hosts. I'm usually joined by Nyasha, but he's in the background. He's working, to get proper stats, proper algorithms working so that, we can use these going forward. So while he's away, I'm going to be, hopefully I'm not going to sink the ship, but yeah, right. So for this video, right, I know we've been away for quite a long time since the World Cup, final. But this week we're starting, right? We're going to be more consistent, bringing videos weekly as before. And we're going to be starting off with a big one, right? So probably the biggest rivalry in club rugby, Munster versus Leinster, right? So the Irish rivalry between those two. And in my opinion, it didn't disappoint. I haven't really gone online to see what people think about that game, but I think it really didn't disappoint. I think it was a really competitive game. So we're just going to go through that game, see how it played out, see what happened with the stats. Obviously, Leinster came out on top over Munster. We're going to see how exactly they did that. All right, so we're just going to get straight into that, right? So the first thing that we're going to look at is just an overview of the game, all right? So firstly, the score, Leinster won 21-16, right? So they scored 3 tries, all 3 tries converted. Surprisingly, they didn't really score any penalties, right? So I think they had a few opportunities to go for penalties, but they ended up going for touch, which for those few occasions, it's actually very interesting because Ireland did the same thing. If you look back at the World Cup against South Africa, so they didn't really take the points that were on offer. I mean, for posts, but they went for the corner, and it actually paid dividend. So yeah, so they didn't have any penalties. On the other side, Munster scored 1 try, and the rest of their points, which was 9 more points, were scored from 3 penalties. All right, so that is an overview of just how just how the scoring went, and then just looking at the position and the territory. Interestingly enough, even though Munster lost the game, they had 54% possession. It's not a massive advantage, but they did win the possession game. They had more of the ball, but they didn't have more of the territory, right? So Leinster had 57% territory versus Munster's 43, which is very interesting, right? So which meant that maybe Leinster's attack was a little bit more potent, right? So they managed to get in the right parts of the field. And then looking at the set pieces, scrums and lineouts, right? So for the scrums, right? So the scrums were no team. I think Leinster at the end of the day obviously had the better scrum, right? So they had 6 scrums, 100% success rate. Leinster, on the other hand, lost 3 of their scrums, right? So they had actually so I was actually definitely wrong. Leinster had the much better scrum. Munster had 5 out of 8 of their scrums, which meant a 63% scrum success rate. But I think it was very interesting to see because Munster also, both teams won penalties off the scrum. I think Munster, I specifically remember early in the second half, them winning a scrum penalty off their own ball. So, it was interesting. I think Leinster also won a couple of penalties off their own scrum as well. So the scrum battle was quite interesting there. Their lineouts were solid, right? So Leinster were 100%, 14 out of 14 at the lineout time. And then on the other hand, Munster had 14 out of 15, right? So they lost one lineout. I think it was a not straight in the first half. But, that's a good scrum. They had 2 international players. They had Tyke Byrne and also South African, I'm forgetting what his name was, Jean Klein. Jean Klein also coming back as well. So the scrum was quite solid on both sides, right? But looking at the 2 main elements of the game, the attack and defense, right? I mean, set piece is important. You all know how much I cherish scrums and lineouts, but ultimately the attack and defense, which is built off of your set piece, and also your attack is built on your defense. Just looking at the attack for either team. So clean breaks, Leinster had 6 clean breaks. So actually, just to remind you that Munster had more possession, right? And I think these stats over here then tell us how they then got that Leinster, despite losing the possession battle, they won the territory battle, right? They had 6 clean breaks versus Munster's 3. 377 meters for Leinster versus Munster's 475. So Munster had more meters, and then handling errors, right? So I think Munster did a good job of putting Leinster under pressure. So they had 11 handling errors versus Munster's 10, 153 passes for Leinster, 189 for Munster, right? So obviously they had more possession. Munster had more possession, so they're going to have more passes. 7 offloads for Leinster, 1 offload for Munster. I think that's a very key stat. And then 19 kicks from hand for Leinster, 24 for Munster, 7 mauls. One of the mauls was a try, right? So that's that's one thing that they did quite well, Leinster, that is. 5 for Munster. So the attack, we can see that from just from looking at the stats, and we'll talk about just an overview of how the game went. But just looking at the stats, it looks like Leinster did have some key stats which put them on the front foot. And then defense. I think defense was the major thing in this game. I think both teams had really good defenses. Both teams were operating at close to 90%. Leinster was a little over 90 and Munster was a little under 90 for tackle success rate. And then penalties conceded, right? Leinster had 12, Munster had 10. Turnovers 1, 5, 5. But I think these two stats are quite close, right? So 12 and 10, 5 and 5, they're quite close. However, I think for me, it's, I've said it a million times already. It's, you can win your stats, you can get stats, penalties, and all these things, but it's all about the timing. When do you get things right? When do you get things wrong, right? So that's, I think that's probably where Munster might have faltered just a little bit. And then 1 yellow card, no red cards. And yeah, so just to talk about, obviously this is an overview of the stats, but just, the key moments during the game. I think to begin the game, Munster did quite well because coming into this game, a lot was made out of Leinster bringing in like their full team. I think the only person was missing was James Lowe. I don't know if it's still the eye issue. I haven't really looked up on it, but James Lowe was the only person missing, right? The whole team was stacked. You've got Irish international players on the, starting and on the bench. It was a stacked team. Munster, on the other hand, Peter O'Mahony, I think he had a slight injury from last week. He didn't play. Jack O'Donoghue didn't play. I don't know if their centre number 12, he came from the Chiefs. I'm forgetting his name. Alex Nankivell, right? He's been one of their best players. He didn't play today. I don't know if that was a strategic thing or if there's an injury. I didn't look into that, but he didn't play either, right? But despite that, Munster were the ones who actually started off the game quite well. I think they did really well at structuring and shaping their Leinster defense with their kicking. They targeted O'Brien, the Leinster number 11. And also with their passes, they were finding space quite well, right, on the outside and even using the inside ball. So they did quite well to get the go forward, and that provided. I mean, that it paid off quite early when Simon Zebo, uncharacteristically, Gary Ringrose missed the tackle on him. It looked like Zebo was getting on the outside, so Ringrose was kind of wanting to cover that space, and then Zebo just hit him with that little inside step, and then drew twin defenders, on the outside. Winger gets the ball, he offloads like a little sunny ball outside offload to Casey, the scrum off, and then he scored. He avoids touch on the outside, and then he scores in the corner. So they did really well, and even like after that, they also had off a scrum. They passed the ball to number 10. I think it was one of those Johnny Sexton loops as well. Gary Ringrose misses a second tackle in a few minutes, but then they didn't really capitalize because they had a huge hole with Tyke Byrne attacking that hole, but then they got held up a couple of phases later. So Munster did quite well, but I don't think they took the opportunities that came to them, right? So I think that first bit was, I think it highlighted that pretty well. And then the next phase of the game, which I think, probably the second half of the first half, that's when Leinster started, wresting back control of the game. I think, if you're going to summarize the game in a, just in one statement, I think Leinster, I think this game just came to just test players. They had more test players, more experience, and those guys managed to, especially their loose trio. I think the Leinster loose trio did well on defense. They worked, they complemented each other. I mean, if you're going to create a loose trio for Ireland at this point, I think O'Mahony's not going to be playing in the Six Nations, but if you're going to select one, you're probably going to select that Leinster loose trio, really. So they did quite well on defense. They had key turnovers, and they managed to score two tries off of that pressure, because once they tightened their defense, Leinster didn't know where to go. Those spaces that were there before, they weren't there anymore. And they scored. I think Jameson Gibson Park scored off of Munster not knowing where to go. There was a loose ball, he kicked it, he scores. And then as the pressure started to build, Leinster, that is, I think they got a yellow card. They got a yellow card because off of a line break, but even though Leinster was starting to build a little bit of pressure, they weren't getting things right. I don't think they were gelling quite well. You probably give them a couple of weeks. Hopefully for them before Heineken Cup, they managed to get a little bit more cohesion. But they were getting things wrong. Maybe a forward pass here, a knock on there, and even after the yellow card, the line out that then came off of that, they dropped the ball, conceded a penalty, and then they chatted to the ref. They got marched back 10. So even though they were doing quite well, they were coming back into the game. They were also getting things wrong. But then eventually they then got a try off the line out from Dan Sheehan. So yeah, that's how the first half played out. And then in the second half, the first part of the second half was a bit weird, right? Because both teams kind of had their moments. But that's when the defenses, we talked about the 91% for Leinster and the 89 for Munster. They had key defensive moments, right? So I think two moments that stood out for each team for me. The first one was when Munster was under pressure and then Tyke Furlong knocked on the ball with inside the 5 meter line. And then, they clear the ball. Leinster still comes back. And then from there, Munster number 7 gets the turnover, right? So Munster was doing really well. I think their defense this season has been really good. But on the other side as well, even when Leinster got a line break, Jack Crowley, of all people, got a turnover over the ball. So I think both teams, both moments, actually, both of those moments are Munster moments. And then the loose tree, I think, for Van der Flair, Jack Conan, and also Caelan Doris, they got key turnovers, in critical moments. So I think that, that beginning of the second half, that was very interesting, especially the defenses were doing quite well. But again, I think it's all about getting things wrong at the wrong moment. And I think that's probably where Munster did wrong, where they went wrong. Score is 14-13. I think it's the 66th minute or somewhere between the 66th and the 64th minute, when, of all people, Tyburn hits the scrum off. They're still actually in Leinster's half. He hits the scrum off when he has the ball. They get a penalty. From that penalty, that's when I think it was Jameson Gibson Park passes a long ball to the wing. Munster did miss 2 tackles at that point. So yes, you've got a very good tackling day, but then you miss, I think it was 2 or 3 missed tackles, where the winger goes inside and then scores in the corner again. Right. So it's those key moments that really lost Munster the game. And from there, also, I think, after that, Munster were coming into the game a little bit. I think it's very important to note that when Conor Murray came onto the field, I think he really changed because, like I said, they weren't really finding the spaces. But when he came in, I think it did a really good job of putting guys into space. He had a really good game. He also had that little snipe on the blind side, hurdled over one guy. I think it was then the Leinster fullback who came in and then he slipped. And then, Conor Murray then, gives the offload. But ultimately from that, there was another turnover. I think that was Caelan Doris's turnover from there. And then, eventually, I think at the end of the game, Munster had the ball. They got a key turnover at the last minute. And then from there, they really couldn't go anywhere. And then they knocked on the ball. Another handling error. But so even though they didn't have as many handling errors, they didn't have, the turnovers, one were the same. It's just that Munster got these things wrong in the wrong moments, right? So basically, that's how the game played out, and I think it was very interesting. It'll be very interesting to see how these teams go, because obviously they're going to have their players come in as the season progresses, and then Heineken Cup is coming in a couple of weeks. I think it's probably going to be the second weekend of December. So that's going to be interesting to see how these teams perform. Right now we've got the Sharks doing quite well. I think they're number 1, if I'm not mistaken. But as the season progresses, you're going to expect these two teams as well as some of the other South African teams, especially when they get their guys gelling within their teams since they've only just gotten back. When they get, they're also going to be competing. But, I think for Leinster to get this head-to-head, that's very important. So, that's basically how the game played out. So we're looking forward to this weekend's matches, and we're looking forward to how these teams perform as the competition progresses. But that is basically this week's or at least this recap of the game. Amazing game. Also, just highlight some key players. Conor Murray did quite well, I think, for Munster, and then the loose trio, like I said, for Leinster, they did quite well. So So that is that. If you have anything that you'd want us to cover, any key games that you want us to cover going forward, do let us know. And we'll see you in the next video.
At Start Experience.